it has been my honor and my joy to meet Dr. Ramani in many of the events that we have had together. I am a fangirl of Dr. Ramani. I have found her voice to be incredibly clear about a very complex topic, especially when we add the whole culture aspect to it, right? Because when we are talking about narcissism, which is already super complex, and then we bring it to the collective culture, I think this adds another layer that it makes it very difficult for us to go into the Western American traditional way of looking. And I think she has a really beautiful voice and such deep clarity that every time I have the opportunity to meet and chat with her, I am the first one there. So our intention today is really to have a chat, a conversation, and really welcome all of your voices and your questions more than us or me sharing what I have. So I really want to invite everybody to come and ask the question that you have been contemplating, and feel free. You're in a safe space. We're really here to learn and to appreciate this together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalia, and thank you for having me and sharing of your time here today. It's such a pleasure, as always, to be here in Dubai. Back here in this room again. So, and I was here last time with Dr. Christine Cocciola, who is one of my closest friends back in the United States. So yeah, it's really nice to be back here.
So our topic today was to talk about emotional abuse. So maybe you can share with us some of the subtleties about emotional abuse.
You know, when Keyani approached me to even have this conversation, I thought, how can we expand this lens a little bit beyond just narcissism to emotional abuse? Because one of the challenges people face is we sort of have separate things happening here, right? Number one, for the longest time, when we talked about abuse in a relationship, we really kept it focused on physical abuse, which is quite obvious. It's very measurable. It's very observable, right? And, you know, obviously physical abuse even takes in a range from throwing an object all the way to obviously doing, you know, using weapons, all kinds of significant physical harm. But we've known for a long time, and the research has shown that emotional abuse actually does more psychological harm to a person than physical abuse. Now, they're usually paired together, but it is amazing how much of this is held by the emotional abuse. And this obviously matters in children, it matters through adolescence, and it matters in adulthood, okay? Emotional abuse is so much more hard to, I'm going to use the scientific term, operationalize, to define, to codify, to create a number. You know, listen, we know if somebody's been beaten and a bone has been broken, we can quantify that, right? 3 punches were thrown at someone, we can quantify that. What exactly is emotional abuse? And at the core of emotional abuse is the loss of safety in a relationship that should be safe because it's predicated on trust, closeness, survival, for example, a parent to a child, right? So that disruption in safety, where the person who's being harmed, who's being abused, their body is increasingly becoming hyper-aroused. They're always on edge, right? Their heart is beating faster. They're constantly, you know, again, they're from a nervous system perspective aroused. They're constantly hyper-vigilant. And they avoid talking about things, right? If I say this, they're going to get mad. If I do this, they're going to get mad. So if I speak my mind, so basically not only are people avoiding topics, they're avoiding being themselves. If I say something I need, something I want, something I hope for, I am going to be shut down or worse. Emotional abuse is also tricky because we often think of emotional abuse as somebody screaming at someone. It could be that. But it could also be somebody who immediately withholds and withdraws emotionally when they feel a demand is being made on them. There's no more efficient way to train another human being than to pull away every time they do something, so then they learn, I better not do that anymore. That loss of closeness is actually more terrifying for a human being than someone coming at you. Because someone coming at you and screaming at you is still engaged. I know that sounds sort of paradoxical, but this is something we've heard from many, many survivors that, hey, you're screaming. I matter enough for you to scream at me. Okay? But ultimately, the core of it is that loss of safety. And other things happen too. You've all heard the term gaslighting, 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 right? What this term, unfortunately, we don't even do a good job of measuring and defining that. Gaslighting is not just a difference of opinion. So I could say, we were supposed to start at 1:30. I could say, Natalia, you gaslighted me. You told me you were starting at 1:30. Natalia didn't gaslight. Okay, we started at 1:43. Now, if Natalia said, I never told you we were starting at 1:30, now we're starting to creep into gaslighting territory. And then if Natalia said, I think there's something wrong with you. Like there's something off about you. You keep obsessing over these. Now we're in gaslighting territory. Natalia is not only denying my reality that I received a message that this starts at 1:30, but she's telling me there's something wrong with me. This paradigm of gaslighting, and I'm giving you a very concrete example, where somebody's being chronically told, you're wrong, that didn't happen, I never said that, you didn't feel that. Don't be ridiculous. Stop being so dramatic. You're exaggerating. You're constantly being told you're dramatic, you're demanding, you're needy. And so the person who's being labeled that way for making very normal needs known in a relationship slowly gets dismantled and feels as though they're losing entirely touch with reality and feel crazy. Okay? That form of chronic manipulation, whether it's lying, whether it's through gaslighting, whether it's through shape-shifting reality, is also a big part of emotional abuse. Another strand of emotional abuse is betrayal. Betrayal is not just infidelity, though that's a very common form of betrayal we talk about, but it's any sort of, again, defiance of the social contract of truth in a relationship. It's taking money that's not yours. It's sharing a secret with someone when you said, please don't tell anybody this, right? It is any kind of deceit in a relationship. That too is a form of emotional abuse. And above all else in emotional abuse, there's often no clear path to repair. We've all made mistakes in relationships. We have maybe not been as truthful as we could be. We have not been as nice as we could have been. We might have even yelled at someone. We're human beings. The issue isn't always the bad behavior. It's the repair. What do we do afterwards? Do we take responsibility? Do we apologize? Do we check in with a person? Those experiences actually create stronger social bonds. Because a disruption in Safety's Act, you're shown, this is human. I am taking ownership. When you take ownership, the person harmed feels, okay, I'm saying I saw this correctly. It's the greatest gift you can give a person. In an emotionally abusive relationship, that path doesn't exist. Now, here's the other challenge, Natalia, with emotional abuse and why this topic came up. It relates to some writing I've been doing recently in developing training materials for therapists. The challenge with emotional abuse is there's a lot of ways it can come into a relationship, not just narcissism. We're going to talk about where narcissism is unique in the world of emotional abuse. Many mental illnesses are associated with emotional abuse. Okay, that's where this gets challenging. Depressed people can be emotionally abusive. People living with addiction can be emotionally abusive. Psychotic people can be emotionally abusive. People with post-traumatic stress, all forms, complex trauma and PTSD can be emotionally abusive. People with ADHD can be emotionally abusive. People who are neurodivergent, for example, autism spectrum, can feel emotionally abusive. Okay? Here's the big difference. All those other conditions I've laid out, trust you me, this is a really difficult situation for people in these relationships who are saying, I so resent how they're treating me, but I understand they have this illness, but I so resent how they're treating me. I'm very unhappy, okay? And typically, when in dementia, even there can be, right? We can support the person going through it, okay? Through education about the condition, all of that. But when all these things I've talked about, from addiction down to dementia and everything in between, there's a relative consistency in the emotional abuse. They're doing it to everybody, right? They're hostile with everybody. They're impulsive with everybody. Everybody from the clerk at the coffee shop, to your mother-in-law, to the man who's come to fix the garden, to you to your children, everyone. So everyone's like, oh, God, this is really difficult. Now you as the survivor have other people who are saying, yeah, this is tough. So now you can see this is the illness talking. I'm not saying that it doesn't hurt, but that's a very different context than what we see in narcissism, which is the narcissistic person is charming, charismatic, well put together, and even seemingly empathic with their boss, with their friend that they play golf with the person they're cheating on you with. They're great there. Even with your in-laws. And then you're behind closed doors with this person, and they're emotionally abusing you to the ends of the earth. So when you try to talk about it, people say, I don't see, I mean, this so generous. Bought the dinner for everyone. You're so lucky. I should be married to such a person. I'm thinking, oh my gosh. I have gone into the upside down world. You're now not being just gaslighted in the relationship. You're being gaslighted by the world because now you're ungrateful for not seeing how fortunate you are to be in a relationship with someone whose great virtue is that they paid for dinner. Okay? That's the difference. And so this emotional abuse conversation gets muddy because people will say, whoa, I feel bad. I see that this is a person with PTSD and is behaving abusively. I'll say, okay, so let's unpack this. And once we see this in this consistency, the person will say, everyone's going through this. And folks who are going through this will say, I don't feel alone in this. It's still challenging, but it is very different than what we see in people who are going through emotional abuse in relationships with partners, family members, bosses, you name it, who have narcissistic personalities. That was a very long answer, and I'm sorry.
No, I think that was very clear in terms of understanding the difference. And then for me, where I really go to is what happens when the abuse happens from the mother to the child, and the child doesn't know what it is, right? You are like the fish living in the water, and they cannot see or understand what is happening. Even when I work with adults, years later, they go back to their childhood and they report that invisible fog, that idea of feeling something invisible, but they cannot name it or define it because the emotional abuse is so subtle. So how do we know? How do you know? How do you work with this?
I would say, Natalia, you have to go into the body. You have to go into the body. The big mistake is we're spending too much time here. Okay, you can't think your way through it. We hold the greatest hurts we've experienced in our lives, especially the hurts of childhood, in our bodies. Take your client into their body. Where are you? Just bring them into the room. We breathe, we ground, we watch our chest go up and down and say, where are you feeling this? These are old wounds. Old wounds don't reside here. They reside here. Okay? So when we can bring it into that somatic space, because this is trauma. Listen, and in fact, part of what I'll be speaking even at OIPO, we keep using this word trauma, right? And a lot of people are getting a little burned out on the use of trauma. But what is trauma? But again, it's a disruption in safety, right? It's a disruption in safety, which is why emotional abuse is trauma. I think for too long, what's happening, sometimes trauma researchers make this distinction between big T and small t, which I think also sort of cheapens the experience of someone who was emotionally abused by a parent, right? There's a lot of guilt, especially in our culture, Asian culture, Eastern culture, if we view our parent as having emotionally abused us. I mean, I can say this as an Indian, raised in a Hindu Indian family, is that if you view your parent badly, your parent is God. So now this is a sacrilege to view and this is no different in Islamic cultures and Eastern cultures. It is a sacrilege to view your parent that way. So we have to move very delicately when we work with the client, when we can say, this happened, this was real, you're still holding it here. Simply that validation starts moving. It starts moving it. So that child, it is a trauma to have that disruption in safety, right? The child starts to realize the only way I can be safe in the relationship with this parent is to be what they expect me to be. And most importantly, to abandon myself. The self-abandonment becomes the key to the attachment. So when one has to self-abandon to survive, self-abandonment remains the survival strategy for the lifetime, right? So integration then becomes coming back into the self, connecting back with the body. That is how you then get the person back in their own body, back in their own nervous system. So when those threats come again, perhaps an invalidating boss, perhaps an invalidating relationship, perhaps even a friend who makes a passing comment, they're not abusive, but we still feel it in our bodies in that way, we can ground and say, okay, I see this old familiar thing came up, but we have to be willing to validate it first. That's how you do that work.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions, any thoughts?
Hi. Some years ago, quite a long time ago, my husband had a very bad nervous breakdown. I won't tell you that story, but I will tell you very briefly about it was caused by the death of his brother and various other things. He has ADHD, okay? So I completely understand what you say about ADHD. But he has a sister, so my husband is the first one of 5, and number 3, a sister who was, I wouldn't say she was abused by her mum, but her mum had 5 children, so she thought, oh, this little girl doesn't need my help. She wants to do it alone. This little girl was a very able, clever little girl. This little girl has turned into a narcissist. And when I was dealing with my husband's illness, she was the biggest pain in the arse that I've ever come across. And just so that you get an idea, she decided that she could take over the whole situation, which as a wife, I was sorting out. I was making sure my husband went to London, to the Priory. I'd organized all of that. Meanwhile, she's WhatsApping my husband, and it was the early days of WhatsApp, by the way, trying to sort of arrange with him, and my husband had become psychotic by this time, that he would go to Australia, to some, Priory place in Australia. And so I WhatsApped her and I said, I have already arranged for him to go to London, and you will butt out. I'm the wife. You are the sister. Get back in your sideboard. And now I absolutely have boundaries as thick as a castle with my sister-in-law. And it's very sad, but it's her problem, not mine.
Hi, Dr. Ramani. So I'm divorcing from a narcissist after 15 years of not knowing I'm under emotional abuse. My question is around the kids. So I have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old baby. I have a lot of questions, but basically how to protect them, if I can use such a word, from the father. Currently he has abandoned us. Maybe he shows up once after 2 months. He lives next door, but he doesn't even call. And when he calls, he promises my daughter, oh, I'll come and see you and we go shopping. What do you want to buy? And every day, if she calls him, he would pick up, say the same story, and he doesn't show up. So how can I protect them? And the other question is how can I try to raise them not to become narcissists themselves?
So thank you for sharing. And this is a really hard time you're going through. So, and you already told me some of your story as well. So thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that as well. In all the families and all the adult survivors of narcissistic parents, the thing I've seen most often is, and we know this, any of you who work in the area of child abuse know this too, the child needs one safe parent. The child needs one protective parent, okay? Not that simple though, and this is where the answer to your question is gonna lie. The piece that most children don't get, for all the reasons they don't, because most people, we don't get a class in parenting, we're not naturally good at this, is attunement. Attunement, connection, awareness. The more the child gets that, even at the times where the dinner is burning on the stove, you look away, the child has now internalized a stable construct of self. You know, they know they're important enough to be attuned to. They themselves are valued. They're not told to be something else. All the things, right? That becomes absolutely crucial. And it becomes doubly crucial when one of the parents has this narcissistic personality style. Okay, the low empathy, the entitlement, the grandiosity, the natural tendency to subjugate other people into their service, including their children. The other piece to remember, and this is where many co-parents of narcissistic partners make a mistake, and this is the mistake. Once you recognize you're in a narcissistic relationship, there's no point to engage in it anymore. And many times the other parent, okay, Dr. Cochiola calls it the protective parent. I'm just going to call it the healthier parent, may still be ruminating and concerned and maybe even obsessed with this whole situation with the narcissistic parent. What that does is it leaves the child feeling abandoned. You've got to be two parents in one. You have to be doubly attuned, doubly aware. You cannot say a bad word about their father. That's a hard piece here because you feel like, well, I'm not going to, nor do you have to tell them their father's a hero because he ain't. But you can't tell them he's a bad guy. Why? Because you're their safe place. And for a child to hear that one of their parents is a terrible person is very, very destabilizing. The reason trauma harms children so much is all the ways trauma works, but the other piece is the vast majority of traumatized children are not protected and are not believed. If children were believed and protected, it's not an eraser, but it can really help because now the child knows there is safety. But think of all the children we know. Those of you who are therapists know this in particular. Think of all the people we know who were abused as children, and not a single adult in their midst was willing to believe it, because to believe it meant to acknowledge that this family system was dangerous. They were willing to sacrifice that child on the altar of the status quo. So you do not need to tell your children your father's no good, nothing, right? You leave your children knowing that they're important, they're valuable, they're loved, they're safe. As those children get older, because your children are quite young, let's say they do spend time with that father, and the father's shouting at them, or the father's saying mean things to them, and maybe they even come to you and say, Mommy, you know, Daddy has said this, this, and this. You also, again, don't say, I'm gonna, You tell your child, are you okay? You know, I am so sorry. That's very hard. Are you okay? You empathize, you attune. Because the more your child feels safe, that they can bring their concerns to you without their father being turned into a bad guy, they still need to maintain this image of that. You don't bring him into the conversation. You check in on them, and you say that. And then you do what I call drone work. You lift the conversation high, and you say, grown-ups sometimes just don't know how to be. You know, you learn how to play in school together as friends. Sometimes grown-ups don't do that. You talk about grown-ups, okay? So it's not just their father. And sometimes grown-ups don't get it right, but that's not because there's something wrong with you. It's because sometimes grown-ups don't know how to manage their feelings. So now they're knowing, yeah, this isn't cool. You're good, all right? This is not easy to do, and sometimes you won't get it right. But it is being attuned and attentive. I do have to say that the person who's parallel parenting with a narcissistic ex-partner really has a heavy load to bear, because not only do you have to like sort of push down those the anger, the feeling, you want to just, because you're so mad at this parent, you've got to find your places to work on that. Your children are never the place to do that. So I hope that answers your question.
You let the child keep their image of their, let's say, father.
It's not their image. It's more that she's the one person who cannot say that father is a terrible guy. Let's say those that get old, their friends say, your father's so mean. Let it come from their friends. Okay? The friends can be that source of information. You cannot. You're their safe adult. And if their safe adult is telling them that another pillar in their life is no good, then they start questioning who to trust. But don't gaslight your kids as they get older and older. You don't have to say, he loves you so much. Don't say that. Don't say that's the mistake parents make. They say he loves you so much. He doesn't. That's not love. You can very quickly turn it to their feelings, their internal world. I love you. I see you. You're important. Okay? You bring it over to there. But I know you're hurting, sweetie. And then you can even bring in other modalities. You can movement, art, drawing, something that might be able to give them a chance to engage in expression. And you do it alongside them, and they start realizing expressing feelings is okay. But it is a very dichotomized existence for these children. And at some point, you're not going to be able to protect them from everything. They are going to go into adulthood with some sense of guilt of, I hate this parent. And that always is going to weigh heavily until they get sort of that link between the somatic and the cognitive. And then they can come to a more holistic version of this. But the more coherent the narrative you're giving them early, the more they're going to be able to put themselves in a story, not where dad is bad and mom is good. And when they think dad's bad, then fine. That's why it's keeping children away from that. But protecting is your everything.
Extremely interesting topic, very difficult to deal with, especially if you have parents and extended families who are supporting this person. My question to you will be, I asked you, what's the difference between ghosting, gaslighting, and is it particularly only for narcissistic people?
She's asking about ghosting, okay? The dynamic of ghosting is when somebody just disappears. They're here today, gone tomorrow kind of thing, and you can't get in touch with them, and they don't respond to you, and they're gone, okay? Now, ghosting is a subtle dynamic. Unfortunately, the TikTokification of the world means everything needs to be explainable in 2 minutes by someone who's dancing around. Probably not a great way to take on this complex a dynamic, okay? Because there's multiple ways ghosting shows up. First of all, there's the vert ghosting, that's the narcissistic ghosting, which is a manipulative ghosting. It's a person who disappears, stays away, stays away, stays away, stays away. Attention grows in the other person. So when the narcissistic person shows up again, as I was giving Natalia the example before, it's like you've held food from somebody. So when you finally give them food, they'll do anything you ask, right? They'll say, okay, I'm not up that thing. I'm just so happy they're back. That's manipulative. There are some people who cut out of a relationship because there's nowhere to go. They have explained, they have talked, they've tried to set a boundary, they don't feel safe. They're like, I'm done. And they have the luxury to say, I'm blocking their number everywhere. I will never see them again. Those people who do that, who've tried 100 different ways to make the relationship work, if they cut it off, it will be said that they've ghosted someone, okay? Ghosting is also a tricky term because it also relates to where it happens in a relationship. If a person maybe has only had 2 or 3 meetings with someone and says, I don't feel comfortable with this person, maybe it's dating, and they cut them off, that can be called ghosting, but they don't really have a relationship, okay? So that's another version of it. Now, some people say, is ghosting gaslighting? It's tricky because gaslighting requires some level of engagement, right? It's that double whammy. And that double whammy is somebody saying to you, something didn't happen, something doesn't exist, you're perceiving something wrong, and then telling them there's something wrong with them. Well, all that happened here is somebody disappeared. So it doesn't feel like gaslighting. It could leave someone feeling crazy, but that's an internal experience. Gaslighting is predicated on an active form of engagement that I'm going to tell you you're not based in reality and there's something wrong with you, right? That boom, that's gaslighting. So this is ghosting doesn't have that flair, though the person may gaslight themselves saying, I think there's something wrong with me. Maybe I'm to blame for this. I'm the reason they disappeared. Everybody leaves me. Now, for people who have a history where abandonment is an issue, ghosting can be a profound dynamic for them to be exposed to. Interestingly, some parents ghost their kids. Now, the parent may not physically get up and leave the house, but the way the parent controls the child is through silence. So when the child behaves out of line, the parent doesn't talk to them or is very clipped with them, right? It's a form of ghosting. I remember talking to a woman once with a very narcissistic mother who used this as a means of control. And she shared that around the age of 5 or 6, she wrote this in the child's handwriting. She said, "Mommy, you tell me what I did wrong, or I will do anything. Just please talk to me." She held on to that little piece of paper because it was exactly how her mother controlled her. Frankly, like I said, controlling a kid through abandonment is much more profound than controlling a child by screaming at them, right? It has a different effect on that. So you could argue that's ghosting as well, but that's certainly going to create profound abandonment issues. And then if that happens, when that ghosting dynamic shows up in adulthood, it can be incredibly unsettling. And the way narcissistic people can often control a partner in a relationship is to use withholding and withdrawing as a way of controlling. So then when they don't get their way, they go silent. And then the partner's trying to do anything to draw them out. And then what the partner never gets, and I'm using partner in this example, the partner never gets is accountability or responsibility taken from the narcissistic partner who's just merely controlling them by withholding.
It can be healthy as well.
I think ghosting can be, I think ghosting can be a self-protective tactic when people feel everything else has run out. It means it's an unhealthy relationship that a person was trying to get out of. I do think that there are people who quote unquote ghost because their nervous systems might get overwhelmed by a situation. So these are people who are so, they themselves may have trouble regulating in the face of intimacy and closeness. And I think that becomes even a different form of ghosting. So it's this big term that actually is very, very subtle. And I think because of, again, internet, Instagram, and all this nonsense, we try to simplify something that's actually a very subtle.
Thank you, Doctor, first of all, for sharing all the things that you share online. It's helped me tremendously. So I just want to start by thanking you. Yeah, and I guess my situation, obviously, I think being the only, pretty much the only male in the room just shows. Yeah. I guess it just shows how much more prevalent narcissism is with the male gender, correct, over the female. But yeah, my situation a little bit different. So I come from a typical narcissistic family dynamic with my mother being quite severely narcissistic. Father considered the enabler parent, and then my elder brother being the golden child, also narcissistic in that family dynamic. And yeah, me considered the black sheep of the family. So obviously very tough upbringing. I never knew what was going on, like you said, when you're brought up in that environment, heavily gaslit since you were a kid, never trusting your own self, your own compass. And then what made things worse was that I attracted a partner that also came from a narcissistic family dynamic. So her father was the narcissistic figure. So it was pretty much gender role reversed to my family, with her elder sister also being the golden child narcissist. Exactly. But for me, obviously at the time, having done no healing work, no therapy at the time, I thought, oh, this is great. This was very familiar to my nervous system, because you always attract familiar chaos before you heal instead of familiar peace. And so, yeah, I thought everything was great. And then naturally I started to get depressed over time, not realizing what was going on. Because again, her family felt very similar to my family, and I didn't know what was going on until I got into therapy. And then I started to figure out all the pieces together. And then I realized that I had attracted a partner that was actually not meant for me. It was meant for the unhealed version of me. And then, of course, you know what happens when you decide to pull away from, well, let alone one narcissistic family dynamic, but two at the same time. It was the biggest smear campaign that I have ever been through in my entire life, you know. And then not only that, they actually joined forces and like ganged up on me as well. So, I mean, yeah, this was 3.5 years ago. It took me a good 2 years to, you know, crawl out of the rubble. I remember you using that term because I was so gaslit and so confused. Obviously, I had PTSD, complex trauma. Yeah, it was just like a crazy situation. And then obviously me being a male, I feel like it's a little bit more difficult when there's a female narcissist because nobody believes the male. I kind of felt like a Johnny Depp Amber Heard little bit situation where nobody believes you because you're the male, so you're supposed to be quote unquote, the bad guy.
So I want to understand something about what you're sharing here. Is you're saying that your wife not only was from a narcissistic family system, but she herself also had this personality style?
Not as much. She obviously had narcissistic traits, as do many people, just because as part of the family, you naturally have some to rub off. But she wasn't allowed to go against her family, so
ultimately chose to stay in
she had no choice. Yeah.
So she abandoned you.
Yeah. So I decided to pull out because it wasn't healthy, but then it was like a 20 versus 1 situation, basically. It was so painful for me because not only was I going through a split with my ex, I was also going through a split from my own family at the same time, and a massive smear campaign happening all at the same time. So my question basically is, how do you deal with these sort of smear campaigns? Because I was so desperate to get my side of the story out there. But obviously, like you were saying earlier, in a region that isn't maybe as aware of narcissism, and it's very taboo to go against Middle Eastern parents and families, especially when it's your mother as opposed to your father. That's even a tad bit more difficult. I just felt like for years I wanted to get my story out. But at the same time, I felt like running around and telling everybody would only not do me service. So unfortunately, there's so many people that turned against me and thought that I was, the bad guy and all of that. And I just wanted to ask, how do you deal with such a massive smearing situation that includes your family and your ex-partner's family?
So first of all, I'm so sorry
Thank
you went through this. This is such a difficult, all the dynamics we've been talking about, not being protected, not being chosen, frankly, One of the most painful things that happens to somebody when they're going, whether through a smear campaign or even the break of one relationship, and it's not such a smear campaign issue, is the compulsion to want to convince other people of what you're going through, right? I use an example all the time when I talk about this in the United States of, imagine you're in your home and you're in your backyard, a UFO lands in your backyard, a flying saucer from space, and out of this UFO come 3 of these alien people, and they even say, come take a tour of our spaceship, you can even come eat with us, and you do all this, and you come out, and they leave, and you've taken pictures with your iPhone, and none of your UFO pictures have come out, they're just big, bright, thing, and you're, I need people to know what I've seen, right? And everyone's like, oh boy, it's time for us to call the psychiatrist, right? This is very similar to what a person going through one of these smear campaigns goes through. How do I convince people of what's going on? And one of the pieces, the way I work with clients, is I say, I don't want you to put 1 ounce of effort into convincing another human being.
Right.
What we need to do is for you to feel solidly, clearly, and aware that this has happened, this is not good for me, and I am stepping away from it, okay? It has to be in you. And then to be able to develop for yourself a way of communicating about this with people that feels more quote unquote palatable. And we almost have to level that up, especially given the culture that you're in, right? That you cannot speak badly about family, but is there a way to have a conversation to say why you've done this? And then also the radical acceptance of you're not going to get most people on board. Why? In a way, they don't care about you. What they care about is the illusion, the fantasy, the hope, call it what you will, that family is good, family is safe, the status quo is great. Listen, may God bless all those people who have these perfect little families. Yay for you, okay? That's not a lot of people. It's not most people. I think it is many people. But just because that's your story doesn't mean it's mine. Doesn't mean it's someone else's. You have to hold space that this may not be someone else's. But the minute you start trying to dismantle what are these sort of cultural ideals you become the problem because you're threatening the illusion people are living in.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what you're going to come up against. And this is the burden carried by every trauma survivor. If you look at Judith Herman's books, okay, and I can't recommend them enough. She really illustrated that the trauma survivor is the painful reminder to the world that the world doesn't want to see that the world is not safe, and the world is not just, and the world is not fair. We don't want to be reminded of that. That's not a very nice thing. So you now have become a monument to the fact that the world is unsafe. You better believe that they're going to cast you out.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So for you, the distress that comes, and not just you, anyone who's trying to convince others, yes, there was a UFO in my backyard. Rather than for the rest of my life, I'm going to carry my happy little UFO experience in my heart. I'm going to know that there's a world bigger than me out there, right?
Yeah.
That's a hard, and what happens? The UFO survivors all start becoming friends, right? This is why support groups are important, right? When you're in a room with other people who are survivors, all of a sudden you're all saying like, yeah, and the UFO people, they served me chocolate cake. I didn't know they knew about chocolate cake and UFO. So all of a sudden now you're no longer not only feeling crazy, you're feeling back in your body again.
Right.
So it's to show yourself grace of course you wanted to convince people because we are social species.
Yeah.
Right? We are a species. We're not cats.
Right.
Right? Your cats can just go and do their own thing. But we are human beings and we need a social network of about 50 to 100 people around us. That's how we've evolved. And couldn't that be damned, that's what we still need. So that's why we try to convince people of stuff, because we want people to be in our tribe. So when you are the person who says, this tribe isn't healthy, the tribe is going to shut you down. And I think for you to understand, that's why I would actually highly recommend you read Judith Herman's books. Because while the level of trauma she talks about takes on the whole gamut of trauma, you might find some real truth and peace in what she shares in that book, because you share that commonality. So how do you heal is letting go of that peace and recognizing, I went through something.
Right.
My body feels different now that because you must feel better that you're not engaging with these folks anymore, right?
Absolutely.
Your body feels different, right? This doesn't lie.
Right.
You know, and so that return to health, I think I'm one person says wellness and tonics and sleep and exercise, all great. You can dump the toxic people forever.
Yeah.
There's your secret to longevity.
It's true.
So, but that doesn't sell very well. So people are like, just drink this. I'm not so sure about that. But for you, your body's feeling it. You have to trust that. But there's grief work. It's like somebody died.
Yeah. Oh,
And you've lost these systems. You've lost a marriage. And even though you may feel healthier, loss is loss. And you also have to go through that process of grief.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much.
We had a hand in the back there. Yeah, the gentleman in the back had his hand up from before. Yeah, so I can see from here. But yeah.
No worries. Hello. You mentioned before how children of narcissistic parents ultimately have like no choice but to abandon themselves, and basically they exist to the extent their parents want them to exist. It's like a loss of identity, right? Lack of identity.
I would argue it's that the identity never gets too fully developed. That's because it's a child.
How is that? Because then on the other side, that same person might enter sort of a self-realization process, individuation process, right? But it feels like it's two energies pulling in complete opposite direction. On one side, like my identity belonged to someone else, right? The front of myself to someone else's will. But at the same time, this process of self-realization who are kind of getting that identity back. Right? So it's like again, two things pulling in opposite directions. How do you deal with it?
It's such an interesting question. I would say instead of viewing these as opposing forces, it's to understand the function of sacrificing that identity or not having it develop in the first place. Because it really comes down to safety, right? Again, human beings, evolutionarily speaking, do not seek out things that are going to harm them. They don't, right? We see that the berries that are red might hurt us. We don't eat the red berries. The tiger was over there. Don't go over there. We learn, and all of so much of our rituals come through just keeping us safe, right? We are this is a loss of safety. And so to stay safe, the child, again, somatically realizes that for me to remain safe means for me to be what this other person wants, to emulate them. It's the child who runs up to the negating father and says, I want to be a doctor just like you, daddy. Doctor. They want to be seen by the father, right? So that's safety. So the work then becomes, it's to de-link attachment and sense of self from solely safety, right? If we live in survival, we live, but we don't grow, right? We stay fed, breathe, shelter, and I think that's really the issue that many survival relationships face. And survival may even mean you go to school, you take a job, but you're still doing these things. You're kind of still gasping for air psychologically. So it's to understand that was the name of safety. The problem is when there's breaches of safety that are so young, I have to be someone else to be loved, it sticks with us. So the work really therapeutically is to understand, I see. To be safe, I thought I had to sacrifice myself. And that then in adulthood, you recognize that paradigm was to keep you safe, right? But you're an adult in the world. You have agency. You have autonomy. You can lock the door. You can advocate for yourself, right? You can learn that. And then becomes the permission for self-realization. But to your point, even as an adult, the child part of still exists within you. And to become yourself not only holds that bodily held sense of threat, but the very real sense that you're going to lose that family of origin, which you might. The gentleman in the orange shirt here is a living example of that. So it's what price sacrifice to become yourself. And it's such an unfortunate part of the human experience that to really fully self-actualize, to fully self-realize, to fully live in your authentic self, the sacrifices can be many. And the more harmful the family of origin system, the greater those sacrifices are, which is why many people do not go all the way into self-realization, self-actualization, because the sacrifice is too high, which is why we do this grounding, regulating somatic work first, because that sacrifice feels so overwhelming that our body shuts it down. And when we can learn, again, to even, it's not, I'm not saying like go up to sit under the Bodhi for 3 years. I'm saying just even learning to be in your breath, to ground in this moment. I've got the ground under my feet, and when these sensations overtake me, I become the 5-year-old child again. I can actually recognize that that's a fragmented part. And again, when we look at this work, we look at Dick Schwartz's work on internal family systems. Really what that's getting at is what all trauma researchers have ever said. In order to stay in an unsafe system, we have to fragment, right? We have the child part of us fragment, the wise part of us fragment. So for a lot of us, we're walking around fragmented wise self. But then let's say we get some critical feedback at work. Now the 5-year-old child is back in the house. He's breathing fast. I'm not going to be loved. I'm not going to do this. He's integrating those all. You're all of those things, right? So the child co-located other itself. We're talking about this in 3 minutes here. This can sometimes be years of work, but I do tell people where you can start in the regulation piece, but also understand this isn't as two opposing forces. That opposing force of safety is always going to be a strong force. So we've got to take away some of its power. You're not okay. That's the hard thing for us to stop. I hope that answers your question.
Integration feels like disloyal.
Integration feels very disloyal, and also integration can result in the loss of people. Right, so there's sacrifice to be. I think the thing that, the question I get all the time from people, we just had a broadcast we did in the States, was somebody says, I want to tell my mother that she's violating my boundaries in terms of how she's getting involved in my family, but I don't want her to get mad at me. I'm like, that's not optimal. Okay. And that, but I don't want her to get mad at me. I said, adult and child just asked me a question. Okay. So let's integrate this. And let's talk a little, let's work through a little bit about what it's going to feel like when mom gets angry at you, what's getting activated in you. Because that, and then they get stuck like, well, I want a version of this when mom doesn't get mad. I'm like, there is no version of that. Mom's going to get mad and you're going to feel right. So it's that, but this is where therapy is important. It's the person in the room that's looking at you and saying, it's going to be okay. I'm right here. She's going to yell, by the way. And I text my patients all the time. We're like, yell. I was like, I said, I feel better. How about you? And she's like, yeah, I guess like now I knew it was coming. It's that it's not, but for the little kid, that's a cataclysm. For the adult, you're like, here we go.
But there's no sense of the tolerance. Like you feel like that is going to be as big as it was when you.
But then talking it through and recognizing, here we go. That's why I talk about radical awareness and radical acceptance. Yeah.
Hello. I've recently woken up to the fact that my mother is a narcissist, my father is the enabler, I'm the aggressor or the scapegoat or whatever it is. But I don't remember much from my childhood of this. And this all seems to have started, or I feel the memory of it all from once I became a mother myself. Now, I don't know. Does that mean that she's become a narcissist over time, or are people narcissists from childhood? Is this something that's happened because I became a mother and it wasn't fitting in with her, or was she already a narcissist? I don't know where it all came from, and I don't know if I'm denying my memories from my childhood, and that's, you know, I've pressed them down so far that I don't remember them, or if they're just not there because she wasn't that at that time. Or if my sister was the scapegoat at that point, because our roles with my mother have changed since I became a mother.
Yeah. So, okay, a couple of things. Do you ever remember a time in your life where you felt safe with your mother?
No, but I also don't remember feeling unsafe. I just don't remember it.
Okay,
I remember feeling misunderstood repeatedly, but I don't remember a feeling of safety, and I don't remember a feeling of fear either.
So remember, we know how dissociation works in a person who feels unsafe, right? When we feel unsafe, we don't like that feeling, right? If we can't get out of the relationship, right? It's the inescapability of an unsafe relationship that is the core of complex trauma, right? Most traumas are a one-off. Somebody attacks you when you're going in your car and robs you, right? And you're never going to see that again. They've attacked you, it's traumatic, but you don't have a relationship to that person. And the escape is that the thief has left you, maybe beaten, and then the police get involved and you get treated, and you'll be more careful in the world, right? That's very different than ongoing emotional, physical, or other forms of abuse happening in a relationship you cannot escape. Now the things that have to happen inside your body are accommodation, not good ones, to stay in this. And these include things like numbing and dissociation. The memories don't get encoded in the same way because it would be intolerable, right? And this is where we see the networks in the brain, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, are all working to keep you attached and safe. But now we see if people long enough trauma, the hippocampus actually gets smaller, right? So we don't register memory the same way. Now what we know though, and this is the work, what I tell therapists all the time, our job with patients is to make them feel safe enough to see what happened to them. For you, it's finding that place of when you finally feel safe enough in a relationship. Because if I went into my first session with a patient, listened to 20 minutes of their history and said, you're a narcissist, they're going to get up and leave and not come back again. They weren't safe. And they feel less safe because I am undercutting the foundational elements of their life. It's for me to listen and for me to say, must have been very difficult when that describing happened. For me to validate an experience, I don't know what that moment is when we feel safe enough, and it's not quantifiable. There's a bit of a shamanistic quality to therapy in that way. That there's a moment where we're both feeling safe, we're right in the room, and now we can go in deeper, and the client now starts remembering more and more. Why? Because they feel safe enough to see that, right? So for you, I think being a mother may actually, again, bringing out the memories in you, your body is connected with your own child, and you're becoming more aware. You're becoming more aware of what happened. But this idea you just said, I can't remember my childhood. I've heard this replayed by many of my clients who have narcissistic parents. I'm like, let's keep talking.
I remember things that happened. I remember holidays, and I remember birthdays, and all of these things, but I don't remember feelings.
Right, but see, those things you remember can also be buttressed by things like photographs. You see what I'm saying? It's episodic memory. Episodic memory is why we think we remember. You don't remember Christmas? Somebody took a picture of you. Someone showed you a picture of your baby, right? So that episodic memory is actually being buttressed by this image. But the feeling you can't connect to because that was dangerous then. And this is where trauma-informed therapy, EMDR, somatic therapy, these have such power because instead of it being that head feeling, it's body feeling, but someone's also holding space for that body. And that's where that gets very useful for you. And then, again, you'll likely parent your child very differently. So many people are worried. Isn't all trauma intergenerational? If this happened to me, am I not doomed to repeat this? Absolutely not. There are mountains of literature showing that if a person can maintain a coherent narrative of what happened to them, for example, the abuse that happened to me was not my fault. This adult harmed me. I was not protected. That was not okay. I am unique in this world. I am important. I am cherishable. When a person can create that coherence, the cycle no longer repeats. I don't have fingers and toes to count the number of phenomenal parents that have come out of processed, examined, felt trauma because they got it, and they now their parenting is it's unsurpassed. So attuned. They're so aware. They do the work. There's fear, but they manage. You know, it's not a switch. We don't just scrub the brain. We live in that fear is there by regulating our body and say, it's okay, I'm not fine. I'm going to be okay. So with safety, I think some of those feelings connect and you'll see.
But she would have been.
So to your other question, would your mother have just been, no. Narcissism, so there was a study that came out in 2024. It was fascinating. The stuff that makes up the narcissistic personality, it's stable over time. These researchers were then able to show, by showing this stability over time, this is definitely a personality. Because remember, what's the argument? This is a disorder, and this is a disorder. This is one day. I wish I could make like a monument to narcissistic personality disorder and burn it. We should not be diagnosing this. Okay? This is a personality, maladaptive personality. It is a healthy personality. It's also a personality associated with higher income, greater representation in leadership. Not a disorder. I mean, these are successful people. They are CEOs. They are at the top of their game. They're rated as more attractive. They have more luck in dating. I mean, the life is working out real well. Okay? This is a collection of traits that our world values. They're assertive. They know what they want. They let themselves be known. They're so cool. Whatever age group it is we're talking about. Yeah, they're compelling people. Sometimes they're even charming, charismatic, interesting, smart. Smart is not a virtue. Smart is smart. Just because a person's smart doesn't mean they're a good person. They're smart. Great. But you're a terrible person. I don't want to spend more than an hour with you. I've learned what I need to learn. Bye. I'm good. So my point is, if you're observing these traits now, unless your mother recently had a head injury or suffered a severe trauma, your mother's always. That's personality. Just like many of you in this room have always been agreeable, you've been conscientious. Personality. I'm tired. Personality changes. I don't know about you, but I'd love for many of you to reflect on, is your personality generally similar to what it was in your mid-20s? I mean, it's shaped a little bit by life, right? And we know that two big things shift personality: trauma and head injuries. By head injury, I mean a tumor, a stroke, a literal injury, anything that injures the brain. And usually that's not in a good direction, because especially if there's frontal lobe damage, post-trauma can result in growth in personality. But in general, agreeable people stay agreeable. Conscientious people stay conscientious. And antagonistic people stay antagonistic.
Doctor. I'm a psychologist working with Keyani, and I work a lot in work psychology realm. And more workplaces report what you have just been saying, that they are dealing with narcissistic colleagues, narcissistic bosses, and this is becoming a very unbearable situation in general, especially because workplace rewards certain personalities. So what are some tips that we can give to such people who are dealing with such personalities? Because not only they are toxic to the said person, they also then realm an army around them, coach others to behave like them and use them against the said person, too. So what are some tips, evidence-based? Thank you.
So in the workplace, it gets challenging, right? First of all, there's something I call the golden goose phenomenon. Do you have the golden goose story in the Middle East? Golden goose? So the golden goose is an old fairy tale where a farmer had a goose, and the goose started laying golden eggs. So the farmer became very wealthy and was able to buy a big castle and give the wife jewels, and they had a wonderful life. And the farmer was getting greedier and greedier. So one day he killed the goose, thinking, I just want I'm going to get all the eggs at once. Well, then there were no more eggs, right? Many times, unfortunately, the narcissist is the golden goose of the workplace. They're getting new clients. They're getting more, they're making the very uncomfortable and often ugly decisions that are more profitable for a company, right? There's actually very interesting literature on this, that when you have a narcissistic leader, the best thing you can do is keep them away from everyone at the company. Let them make their decisions, but don't let them interact with anyone who works there, right? But unfortunately, that narcissistic leader likes their power and the chessboard and the pulling of the strings and all of it, right? So it becomes an untenable situation. It's what I was saying earlier today. One of the most important things we can do is validate a person's experience. And the one place validation never takes place is in the workplace. Who is going to roll up and tell her, oh, your boss is a narcissist? The HR person is not going to do that, right? A manager's not going to do that, because if it's ever on the record that you've now told them that, let's say she's the leader, that she's narcissistic, that person's going to get in trouble, right? This is why in some ways therapy can be such an important tool. If the therapist is going to say, gosh, all these patterns you're describing in your boss, supervisor, whatever, are really consistent with narcissism. But because most people don't get that validation, and if that boss is smart, successful, taking the company in new directions, profits have never been higher, now it feels like a big gaslight. Like, you feel like you're the only one who sees the emperor's wearing no clothes, right? So one thing we do know is that this is a fact, right? Narcissistic people are much more likely to be in leadership. They want to be leaders. They're not good to be leaders, but they want to be leaders. And they're much more skilled at expressing competence when they don't have any. So they're very confident and say, I can take care of that. And what that does is management is much more likely to promote them. Whereas she might be the most competent person, she's bragging about what she's doing. So they're going to promote her, even though she would have been the much better choice, right? And that's also management kind of not always paying attention to, right? And management might be narcissistic as well. You see, that's the problem. So I do tell people documentation becomes important. Being in therapy becomes important. Having strong collegial relationships where maybe you might might even be the subtle eye roll in the meeting, or you're just like, I remember very well, there was back when I was at the university, we had incredibly narcissistic leadership at that university. Ultimately, it was one of the big reason I left, because I saw no more opportunity for advancement. I reached the top. I was already a full professor, but I'm like, this is nonsense. My work was being stymied. So I went and started my own company. But in the meeting, a colleague of mine was being horribly gaslighted. They were a junior colleague. So if I said something in the meeting, I would have put the junior colleague in peril. But I was already researching narcissism. As soon as the meeting was done, I looked at the colleague. I'm like, hey, I wanted to talk to you about something about this weekend. That was not the case. I'm like, you come, let's go chat. And I took them aside immediately and I said, you were horribly gaslighted in that meeting. What you said was true. They were lying to you. And the relief, it was physical change in them. Their entire body relaxed. And they're like, really? And I said, really? No, I made a note from the prior meeting. That's not what happened. And they're like, oh my gosh, thank you, thank you. Did it change the outcome? No. The narcissistic leader still did what they did. But that person, that junior colleague, left feeling sane. To me, that was worth the win. Because now this person was going to trust their body a little bit more. All of you have the power to be the person who turns the gaslight off for somebody else. Now, you may not be able to do it in real time because it might put you both at peril, but you can do it afterwards. And you may actually be turning something around for a human being. So, and in some cases, I'm going to be very frank with you, there is no option. I spent 5 years and I simultaneously worked full-time at the university, had a full practice, and then built a company. And then one day I was able to parachute out of there. But that was an exhausting, long-term plan. Smartest thing I ever did. But sometimes there's nothing that can be done. And then if the narcissistic people and their minions, people who hang around them, are often the ones who stay the longest. And this is how organizations get destroyed. Ultimately, the good people leave, the toxic people stay, and the entire thing implodes. And that's their problem.
Another quick one. What can we do for the narcissistic maladaptive personality types?
What can we do with what? I'm sorry?
How can we help such maladaptive personality types, narcissists themselves? Like the psychologist in me is like, can something be done?
Not mine.
I'm sure.
Not mine. There's a woman in the back with the glasses who's been to your question, I would say you have to be realistic. Number one, if that narcissistic leader is saying, I'm a great leader, our profits are higher than they've ever been, we're doing great, you tell me how amenable they are going to be to change. If the person has the problem with antagonistic personality styles like narcissism, sociopathy, is there's very little self-reflective capacity. There's no sense I'm doing something wrong. It's the shift of the blame off of self. It's your fault. It's your fault. It's your fault. This isn't a problem. I have these idiots who work with me. Okay? My family's a bunch of idiots, right? So if they're shifting blame, how are you really going to mobilize? You've got to find a way. It's like motivational enhancement. You've got to find some point of entry to get them interested in. Unfortunately, for many narcissistic people, everything has to go wrong before they're willing to say, okay, my wife is gone, my company is gone, my kids don't speak to me, and my reputation's gone. Maybe I'm the only common. What are you going to wait for? You're going to wait for that? So what can we do if the narcissistic client comes into your office? Then you can work with them collaboratively because they're already not liking that you have more power than them. And say, what's brought you in? Let's sit down here together and figure out what the path forward is. You have to hold the strictest of boundaries from day one. Because by session 2, they're going to say, start 15 minutes later and then go 15 minutes longer. It's just not a good time for me. We can start 15 minutes later and we're still going to end at 3 o'clock. Oh, well, why am I paying you? You don't have to. Now, either they'll drop out or they'll continue. If they drop out, okay. But the minute you give up that, they hold though. Okay? So those boundaries have to be firm and strong from the beginning. You have to work with them collaboratively. You should be trauma informed. Most narcissistic people have adversity in their histories. But I have to say, the minute you push the accelerator on more emotionally focused work, most of them are going to drop out. 66%. Right? So the few that leave, and I've worked with many narcissistic clients, it's exhausting. It is unsatisfying. It is frustrating. It makes me feel like I'm a bad therapist. I never put two back to back. And I don't drink alcohol, but if I had enough in one day, that might be the day I be in. So let's just leave it at that. But it's exhausting, demoralizing work. And you realize but what it reminds me though is if I'm having this experience, I'm going around this house.
Thanks to your videos and my therapist, I assume I have come a long way. And I have now very good boundaries. I'm still surrounded by few of the great people around me. So one day I started sitting and making a count, and I realized I know 7 of them.
Narcissistic people.
Yes, and fully baked entities, not just traits. So 4 of them are a cluster within a family. 1 mother, old mother, 3 of her children. Father was an alcoholic who is no more. And 3 are in 3 different other families. And that makes 7 of them. 5 of these are women, 2 are men. And 3 are vulnerable old women in the Indian culture. Their husbands are already no more because obviously they suffered from chronic diseases. And now these 3 old women are creating havoc with their children's lives once their husbands are dead. And I am just observing now because I'm more aware than their immediate families. These are all people in my family and my friends' families. The cluster of family where 3 children, grown-up children in 40s and 50s, and the mother 80 are like, it's interesting to observe them now that I can keep myself disengaged. One thing I have observed as a pattern in all 7 of them, that they are very good sleepers. They can sleep very well anytime, any moment. So is it something like a coincidence, or have you also come across this? That
It's funny you say this. It actually takes me to speak about a larger point, which is narcissistic people take very good care of their health. They will live longer than you. So if you're looking at a narcissistic dyad, one person's narcissistic, one person's not, the narcissistic spouse will always be the one to live longer in almost every case. Okay? Why? A couple of things. Not only do they take very good care of their health, but number 2, think of the kind of stress that causes the most inflammation and damage to our body. It's interpersonal stress. Narcissistic people don't have interpersonal stress. Right? We care. We care what other people think. We're worried if we hurt someone. We ruminate when they do hurt us. If I don't care if this teacup likes me because it's an object. And that's how the narcissistic person views you. You're an object. Okay? I like the device and I'd like to take it with me, but I don't think Keyani would like that. So I'm not going to. But the narcissistic person would say like, okay, I want this object. I'm going to take this object. Right? But it's an object at the end of the day. And if Keyani wants to keep their object, you know what I'm saying? It's a nothing. If I decide to stick this in my bag, they'll probably be like, okay, she took our object. It's not like I stole one of their staff members. I'm a human being. But my point in that object piece is that they do live longer. Okay? Because I truly believe that these emotionally abusive relationships may be one of the great public health hazards of our time. We have figured out ways to deal with infectious disease. We have better cancer screening. We have good cardiovascular and cerebrovascular recommendations. We have great preventative healthcare regimens in place, right? In much of the developed world. What we don't have is a means to remove these relationships from people's lives. And I personally think if we could find a way to remove toxic relationships from people's lives, we would see healthcare benefits at the level of quitting smoking. And so, but nobody's willing to talk about this, right? Because family, marriage, family. You know, and I love my family, by the way. I have 2 kids who I love. I trust me, but I have also, and I say this as an Indian woman, my mother really passed passed away this summer. The greatest hole that's ever been created in my life. But what it did was it shattered this family foundation to it. And I was like, I finally was able to say, you're all dead to me. I stayed in touch with you for her. Do not ever darken my door again. Not exactly the beloved Indian daughter anymore, but my father, difficult man, I'm taking care of him now because that's my duty, right? I will do that role. I expect nothing from him, all the stuff, but all these narcissistic casting characters. But of course, he's a more difficult parent, 12 years older than he's still alive. You know, I mean, so, and I see this. I gave a seminar in London where people were talking about narcissistic family members, and it was coming up 96, 98, 93, 99. I said, how old were their spouses when they died? 78, 75, 81, 62. This is a very real stress. We know the neurohormones that are released. We know that how this affects all these inflammatory processes, they're real, and they affect every physiological system in the body, most notably cardiovascular and cerebrovascular systems. Okay? So, and all of this internalized, unprocessed stress is taking a toll on people. And people die. That's what happens. People die. Creating social spaces, creating the conversation around this. Again, the older generation, they didn't have that. We can create things, right? Talking about it doesn't make it go away, but I do believe part of the reasons we see this stress is that people feel that they're insane or a bad person. I'm a bad person wanting to leave both my family system. I'm a bad person for thinking my mother is this way, right? Can we create a cultural conversation around which we say, I see this parent for what they are, and I'm still going to show up in a way that feels right. In India, we talk about dharma, okay? Dharma is duty, okay? Then we talk about karma, okay, which is the sort of intergenerational sort of life cycle that we take. This idea of dharma is almost cellularly held. It is a sense of duty. And when I work with Indian populations, I say, I ain't touching your dharma. You keep that. But I want you to have your dharma with open eyes, which is what a spiritual force is. I can see this clearly, but I will step into my dharmic duty. I'm doing it right now. This is my life. I commute back and forth, East Coast, West Coast, 5-hour flight, 3 times a month to do my dharma. Okay? May end up putting me in an early grave. I like to think I'm not narcissistic, so I'm probably going to drop dead soon. The fact of the matter is that my dharmic duty is something that's inherent to me as a human being. But I don't go in there thinking anyone's going to say thank you or what a nice person you are or say, I'm so grateful you're doing this. I'm doing this for me. It's not fair. It's deeply unfair. I'm going broke. I am breaking my body. This is unfair. But to live, to his question before, my authentic self is a compassionate self. And I'll be damned that someone's narcissist steals that compassionate self from me. This is my dharmic duty, and I'm going to see it through with an open heart. That's what healing looks like. But I'm not waiting for this person to say, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I know it. I don't. I actually don't, because I don't believe in justice that way. I really don't. I am living in a way that is whole, that connected whole. There is a time in my life before I did 7,000 years of therapy that I've been through. This isn't fair. No, it's not fair. None of this is fair. My mother shouldn't be dead. I shouldn't be having to do this. None of this is fair. But to me, by living it authentically and congruously, it feels right. There's a difference. And I can live with that in my body, because I would be well within my rights to say, you are not kind to me. I don't owe you nothing. But then I would be broken off, I would be living in a fragmented way. And more self-abandonment. Exactly. I feel tired with it, but at an existential level, I mean, again, if we even look at if any of you are familiar with Viktor Frankl's work, one of the pieces one of the stories in his book that will always stay with me is that Frankl had received the visa to leave Europe and come to the States. But to do so meant abandoning his mother, who was not well. So he stayed in Europe. He and the whole family went to the camp. Everyone prepared their death. Okay? But many years later, writing in the United States, he would note that he remained him. He would not have left the mother. Nobody would have faulted him for leaving the mother. But he, to be him, who lived literally himself, like, I can't, this is not. Right? So this is what I'm saying. Healing is not easy work. It is not Disneyland. It's not walking down a fairy tale path. Sometimes healing is the more difficult path. You know this from walking away from a family. Okay? And so that my point is that I am not going to leave you with a sugar-coated version. This is the problem with mental health in the 21st century. Pretty much only centuries existed. But this is the problem with mental health. We are trying to make people feel good. That's not the point. We need to learn how to be present with suffering. That's what mental health is. Because if you show me someone who's going to live a life without suffering, especially with these damn personalities around, forgive me for cursing, for these personalities being around, we're going to suffer. But this idea that there's some magical thing we can do to make us not suffer, that's where we're doing our clients a disservice. We're going, again, the only way out is through. Sometimes you just got to walk through the fire. That's grief work. That's trauma work. That is the work of being a human being. And I'm tired of living in a world where we think every day should be happy, happy, joy, joy. Some days hurt. Living authentically hurts. And I think a lot of people throw that word authentic around as though like, I'm being authentically me. I mean, you're being rude. You know, it is knowing who you is first. And at your point, the man in the back point, a lot of us didn't even get the chance to do that work. This is a very complicated conversation around suffering, around growth, around this is not simple. And they are going to live longer than us. I promise you that now.
Yeah. And it seems then that the emotional abuse that we started with kind of, I don't know, blocks or makes our compass of our identity or of our who we are wonky, or we cannot find ourselves in that self-abandonment.
Well, I think it's our true self becomes terrifying because our true self becomes something that by definition is going to be rejected, is going to be labeled as greedy or selfish or bad or, you know, it's a bad thing. Our true self is bad. So it's the unprogramming from that, you know, and so that which is self-abandonment. I can't be myself. And that's long-term work. There's no half-hour workshop or weekend retreat where somebody's going to learn how to do that.
Because every time you get close to yourself, you will feel the terrifying suffering.
You feel the terror. You feel the terror,
and you turn away.
There.
But the only way through is through the terror.
Well, yes, the sense of, because the terror isn't real. It's like saying that I don't want to open the door because there's a tiger outside that door. I understand you think there's a tiger outside that door, but let's open the door. There's no tiger. You're a little kid, it was a tiger. It's not a tiger.
There's no tiger.
Rami, thank you so much for Thank you so much for your work. Thank you so much for your research and putting it out there for a layman to see all these videos and learn about narcissism. I have a first question. A helpful tip from you to a mother who has separated and recently from narcissism. I have a 17-year-old, and you talk about grandiose narcissist, and he is that. toward the daughter as well. It's only toward the spouse behind closed doors, whatever happened, right? By emotional abuse. I don't know how to, I have this compulsion to convince her of the reality, but she won't be able to see it. What do I do as a mother of a 17-year-old who
Your 17-year-old doesn't want to see the reality of a grandiose other parent.
she doesn't see it that way. She doesn't see the reality. She just sees him as the confident, charming father who's taking care of her.
Why do you, or do you feel she's being, how is this harming her?
It's not harming her. I feel it's very unfair and unjust that she doesn't see the reality. I see that. I see that.
Yeah.
How do I stop myself?
You're going to have to stop yourself. Right.
I don't, you use the other parent should be a safety net. I still want to be the safety net.
You are the safety net. But here's where your ego is getting in the way. Right?
It is.
Our ego is such an important part of ourselves, but it's a very ugly part of ourselves. Right? Because what many people who go through these relationships with narcissistic co-parents and ex-partners, current partners, is this isn't fair. Why does my kid, why do I have to live in a world where I went through hell and back with this parent and my kid now still likes their parent? As their parent, assuming that this parent isn't, it's much more complicated if that parent is actively abusing them and the child is saying, what a great parent, right? Where I see this, one scenario I'll see sometimes is like, parent is unfaithful. They're grandiosely narcissistic, they have an affair, they've never actually been bad with their kids, maybe a little bit show-offy. They've really not been super unkind to their kids. They go have an affair, the partner's heart is broken, right? And then the marriage ends, and the children still maintain a good relationship with that parent. It feels like a betrayal, right?
Yeah.
At some level, it's the work for you is there is a win for your daughter to feel like she's got two parents she's allied with, and that for you the win is that you have a good relationship with your daughter. But you do put the relationship with your daughter at peril if that relationship with her father deteriorates, because she's going to blame you. Right. She is going to blame you. And so if you can keep centered for you, at one level it is about your child's well-being. But for you, the work becomes that of grief. Because the grief for you is that a little piece of justice has gone away. That this person who has harmed you still gets to be valued by someone that's very close to you, obviously your daughter, right? And each time we lose some of that sense of justice in the world, we lose a sense of safety in the world, right? The idea that the world is just is a very child, right? And every one of us can look back and say when we know innocence was lost, right? For some people, it's early, they're traumatized. For some people, it's they see that their family's evicted from a home. For other people, it could be as simple as their sister got the blue teddy bear and they got the pink teddy bear, but they wanted the blue teddy bear. But however we learn this relatively young. You know, that it's not always fair and just. And that's a loss of innocence. When that stays in adulthood, it's actually a bit of a stunted, right? So in a way, it's grieving this part, and it's a part. Again, there's a part of you that's like, I want life to be fair. Yes. However that made you feel safe. And you're grieving in a way that can't be true, and you have to take care of that part, which is a very young, right, of you, because trying to convince your daughter, though, could result in the ultimate loss that you lose her. And it's a hard thing, and a lot of parents are in your position, which is, I hate that my kid can't see this clearly, yes, right? But it's the 5 blind men and the elephant, ultimately, right? It depends on what part of the elephant you're touching. The part of the elephant she's touching, that works for her. She's feeling the ivory tusk, you're touching the rough skin, and you're having entirely different experiences. Same elephant, but you are, again, we also, when we're We internally fragment when we experience trauma, but when we go through trauma, the world also gets fragmented and the people in the world get fragmented too. And your daughter and you are having different experiences. It's conceivable that someday in the future, your daughter will say, wow, dad is this or that. Now, I don't want you to say, ha ha, I told you so. I want you to say, it's hard when we have to change our schemas about someone we love. And I'm here for you and I love you. And what I'm asking you to do is superhuman. It's not easy, but hold space for yourself and grace for yourself.
Thank you. Can I just ask you, Dr. Ramani, what do you think about EMDR therapy? Do you think
I think EMDR is a very, very useful therapy for people who've experienced narcissistic relationships or other forms of emotional abuse. Because again, it's trauma informed, and it can really help the person feel more regulated and feel more in their body. And after EMDR, maybe in a better place to do the other work of the therapy, which is to understand, like do the radical acceptance piece and all of that. When you're working with a client who's been through emotional abuse or a narcissistic relationship, you don't want to put the cart before the horse. You don't want to start educating them about this is a narcissist and this is what they do. No, you want the client to feel safe. And EMDR can be a place to start processing those emotions in a way that no longer feels overwhelming. So that then there's more the opportunity for more of that sort of like thinking level, sort of strategic, tactical level work. So I think it's a very, very useful therapy for people who've been through emotional abuse. You just have to have a skilled therapist.
I'm thinking about doing it now. I'm living in Abu Dhabi, and but I might get upset in a minute saying this, but it's quite raw for me at the moment.
It's very raw, hon. It's very raw.
My mum was, we had a chronic, terrible upbringing with my mum, who was really a complete narcissist, diagnosed by me. Me and my two sisters, and there was sexual abuse in our house, and these people, my mum's boyfriend, lived with us for 3 years, was having an affair. My dad didn't know he was away in the Middle East.
So sorry.
And she would throw us under the bus rather than take any accountability, and obviously she's completely gaslighting. And I feel now, this is so weird to say this to you all, but 50 years later, I'm dealing with the aftermath. I'm going to be 60 next year. I've been dealing. 6 years old, I realized I couldn't trust my mum.
Mm-hmm.
And then at 11, when my mum brought this other man into her life, and a man in his late 20s was abusing our family. We were 3 young girls, and she's 83 now. And this year I had to walk away from her. That's why I feel really, vulnerable and whatever. I know I need to try something else because I'm actually getting quite ill in terms of heart palpitations.
Yeah. I'm glad you're going to try that. Make sure you work with someone you feel safe with. EMDR, when done right, moves at the pace that feels right to you. Okay? It's not a race to finish. It is a slow preparation, a slow sense of safety, moving at a pace that you feel and okay with. Because, again, it's exactly what we talked about with trauma. Not only did the person who was supposed to care for you not, she didn't protect you when you weren't at risk. And if you look at
abroad, so we had to rely on my mom, not
correct. You had to rely on an unsafe person. And if you look at Gabor Mate's work, that says that lack of protection in the face of trauma that does so much harm. That if a person is protected after trauma, use the example of a natural disaster, right? Natural disaster can come, burn down houses or flood the houses or earthquake, whatever. People actually recover better from those traumas because other people are going through it and the community is rallying to support people. Still, some will get PTSD, but it's a very different experience than the child growing up in a home where they're not only harmed, but they have to attach to their harmer and there's no protection.
And now, I feel guilty because I had to walk away.
And you feel guilty walking away from an
I
outside
shouldn't.
person.
There's no way that I should.
But remember, the child part of you, the somatically held child of you, doesn't see an 83-year-old person. You see a perpetrator.
Yeah.
You feel.
There's no
remember
remorse
that.
at all.
But the world doesn't get that. They say the 83-year-old person, and how could you walk away from an old person? But this is your process. And again, I want you to pay attention to your body because this accumulated trauma takes a toll. I see rates of autoimmune conditions in people who've gone through these relationships through the roof, 70% in some cases.
My
So-
sister has severe rheumatoid arthritis,
Yes,
no,
there you go.
osteoporosis, the
Exactly.
worst one.
Autoimmune is endemic in people who've gone through.
Yeah. My older sister walked away because he, well, I think he would have just broken down. I don't think he'd be with us today if he didn't, you know.
so
And I've developed, you know, the heart palpitations,
Yeah.
the high cortisol, the food intolerances, you know, obviously the gut.
And food intolerances are autoimmune, right? Allergies. So,
Yeah. But, you know, the baiting was very difficult to take. You know, I know you're familiar with that phrase, the baiting of.
oh yeah, baiting, yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah, you know, and to try to get a reaction. And I know, obviously, not to play into it because my mom really thrived on drama and chaos.
Right, but with the narcissistic person, what they're thriving on is dating a person to get a strong emotional reaction from them so they seem composed in the face of it. That creates the power, dominance, and control they want in a relationship. So there's a lot of agitation of the other, right? I'm gonna keep, you're not reacting to this, I'm gonna go deeper. I'm gonna say the thing to you that will set you off. So the comments get crueler and crueler and crueler until they get the reaction. Then the narcissistic person experiences a release of tension, and the other person feels broken, shattered, and the drama. So, thank you for your question. Good luck.
Thank you so much. This has been incredibly helpful, this session. And I think my last question is going to be a follow-up on the first question asked today about children of narcissists. When the healthy partner is taking care, is the safe partner. In my experience, I think it's easier when the children are very young. And then when they're adults and taking responsibility for their own healing. But there's this age in the middle with the teenagers when they have questions, when they come back with he or she did this and that they are this and that, and then that healthy partner is stuck. You know, they've been protecting them for all those years. They don't want to say something bad about the unhealthy or the narcissistic parent, but also they need to validate the child. They want to be of help. They want to avoid everything we spoke about today that can be the outcome of losing their identity or being traumatized by that parent. So if you can give us some advice to help parents in that position who need to help their teenagers when they become aware of what the narcissistic parent is doing, how they can be of most help to try to prevent all of those negative outcomes.
So you use the word validate, and that's really what it is. It's when kids get into adolescence, first of all, they can watch YouTube as well. So they can watch. To be honest with you, I'm going to give you a case example. I work with a woman who is married to a malignant narcissist. It was one of the worst cases of emotional abuse and manipulation. There's never physical abuse in the relationship, but the emotional abuse, the manipulation, the willful cruelty was some of the worst I had ever seen. Okay? 4 kids. One of the children had special needs, and I think they split up. Kids were probably primary school age. Okay? I consulted with this mother for the next 10 years, saying all the times they validate all. The special needs child, all 3 other children at one point or another became suicidal or attempted suicide. That is how harmful this malignant narcissistic parent is. Okay? Variously in and out of psychiatric hospitals, you name it. The mother was like watching a person on a wild course. I'm like, cannot let go. I'm here, I'm going to help you hold on, but we cannot let go. All right? As time went on, at least one of the children has remained allied to the malignant narcissistic parent. And you can see it's a very trauma. It's not that this is a bad kid. It's just a very trauma-mediated response of staying attached to the perpetrator. One of the other children, at around the age of 17, had seen one of my videos, not having any idea that the mother was seeing me for therapeutic consultation. and said, Mom, do you think Dad's a narcissist? So she said, I'm going to get back to you on that. She said, what am I supposed to say? And I said, you're not taking this bait. Okay, because for her, this felt, to your question, this felt like an addiction, right? Finally. And what I told her to say is, ask your daughter, that's an interesting question. And like, meanwhile, you've got to like, smaller and not smile, but that's an interesting question. What's leading you to say that? And the daughter, chapter and verse, said, well, I watched the video and the lady said this, and this is what he's doing, and it's not good for me. And then taught the mom, you've got to be empathize. It's really hard. I mean, that's a really hard thing to see. And I am, again, I'm so sorry this is happening. Now, how can I help you through this? At no point did she say, that's not true. See, that's the validation. And in a way, the daughter was playing a little bit of a game of chess with her, right? Because if the mother said, you better believe it, let me tell you something, pull up a chair, I'll tell you how narcissistic your father is, that might have been a bit too threatening for the daughter. Because what she did was she opened the door for more conversation. Okay? So now the daughter was able to say, yeah, this part doesn't feel good, this part doesn't feel good. Takes me to another client who was married again to a narcissistic man, like more of a vulnerable narcissistic man. Didn't speak badly about the father. And when the daughter was like adult, like 25, 26 years old, came up to the mother and said, I don't know how you did it. And the mom was like, actually didn't know what the daughter was talking about. There's no context. Like, what? She said, how did you stay married to him? Because the daughter was still having to deal with the father at times. And the mother said she was washing dishes, so her face was away from the daughter. And smiled down and said, well, it was challenging at times. And she said, I couldn't have lasted a day, and you lasted all those years. And the mother said to me, it was almost an audible sound, something after all those years, 25 years, real longer. But they divorced, I think, when this child was like 8, 9, 10, something like that. That you can validate, you can empathize, you can ask the child to tell you more, you can ask the child, how can I support you? And you can, and if the child pushes it, says, come on, are they or aren't they? Say, well, you just told me all this list on the video. It seems to me the way you're putting this together, it sort of fits. How does it feel for you to put these pieces together? I know I'm telling you to kind of be your kid's shrink, but you cannot, again, you're in a chess, right? And so it is validating saying, this sounds tough, or it seems like it's been a rough road, or I am sorry, or nobody has the right to yell. They keep pointing out what is healthy, what is unhealthy. I am sorry, showing empathy. But don't go all the way and say, let me tell you how bad they are. That's it. But don't gaslight them. Say, that's not true. Don't say that. So you're skirting, and no one's ever going to get it just right. Even the lady washing the dishes said, oh, I was probably a little too enthusiastic in the conversation. She said it felt like so many years of waiting for this, to waiting for this, because the woman said, I felt so guilty getting a divorce, and my kids now had to spend time one-on-one with this parent, which I think was not good. So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, right? If you stay in the relationship, now your kids are seeing an absolutely terrible model of marriage. So there's no winning in these games. Each person has to choose for themselves within their culture what pathway is going to be the healthiest, the safest, and sort of can work within the culture a person is in. Either way, it's hard for the kids. And I think that's a piece of grief and moral injury that we all carry in. And this concept of moral injury is this sense of, it feels a lot like post-trauma. It's this wound we feel when we feel we've done a bad thing. Originally, moral injury research was focused on like law enforcement, firefighters, people, for example, let's say the firefighter saves 3 members of the family but still leaves a child in the house. That firefighter is not going to say save 3. The firefighter will often experience a very strong emotional reaction that I left 1. This concept of moral injury is now we're seeing very clearly happening in people who have these narcissistic divorces, who now feel like I wasn't going to harm these kids either way. And I made a bad choice all those years ago, having a child with this person, harming my child in this way. And that moral injury then simply becomes something, one more thing we have to work on, because it was never intentionally bad. The firefighter didn't intend to leave the child. It was the house was burning down. The firefighter could have died too, had they kept going in. And in the same way that when we see how, think about it, in 2025, we're still very, very bad at teaching young people how to choose healthy partners. Most of our children don't necessarily know how to do that. Their peers don't know how to do that. We give terrible templates and movies and television. We give terrible templates, families we're raising them in. So we have to show ourselves that same grace. And then listen, even my parents' generation and one before, it was all arranged marriage. It was like a casino. You didn't know what you would end up with. You just had to go with it, right? And that's why Indian marriage, you know, like the flip of the coin. If you get lucky, you were assigned to someone good. In many cases, you know, and so that all of these things, the moral injury, though, it's even knowing it's a thing, and to know that you like, no matter what I did, this was terrible mistake from the beginning, and then to understand you never set out to do this, and again, that form of grief.
Well, I'm sorry to say, but it is our time, and I just want to say thank you so much for your wisdom, and I'm really gonna carry this idea of the fairness of the self-validation and looking for not the self-abandonment, that key. I think those are the three things that I'm carrying with me after this beautiful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.